city of Bradenton, and we welcome you here today for our program. A few housekeeping items. If you have a cell phone, which I'm assuming most of you do, please turn it off, because if it goes off while we're taping, you have to make a donation to Scott's favorite charity, which I think is Scott. Not sure. Also, should you need to use the restrooms, they are across the hall past the business center. When we are doing this program, we are going to be taping. We do need to have you on mic. So once the program starts, I will be down there with you. I will be having the microphone. I will be running back and forth. So please make sure that we get your comments and questions on the microphone so that we have a wonderful program to share with others. One of the things that is very important to me when I come to programs like this is to get quality information, something I can use, as well as I like being entertained a little. Many of you probably already know our guest speaker, but you may not know everything about our guest speaker. There is a wonderful game out nowadays called You Don't Know Jack. Well, here at the League of Cities, sweeping our program is You Don't Know Scott. And we have spared no expense bringing this show to you. We are going to participate for not prizes and money, but candy. And we're being very technically adept with this. I'm going to ask you some multiple choice questions. You will pick your answer. If it is answer number 1, you will raise 1 finger. If it's answer number 2, you'll raise 2 fingers. Or answer number 3 will be 3 fingers. Everybody understand? Everybody got their game piece ready? Okay. Now, when Scott was a little boy growing up, what did he want to be? Is it number 1, a librarian, number 2, a race car driver, or number 3, a teacher and president of the United States? Make your choices now. 1, librarian, 2, race car driver, 3, President of the United States and a teacher. The correct answer is 3. Give yourself a pat on the back if you were right, and if you were wrong, keep trying. What was the name of Scott's high school mascot? Was it 1, the Lakers, number 2, the Bears, or number 3, the Benevolent Dictators? So is it 1, the Lakers? Is it 2, the Bears, or number 3, the Benevolent Dictators? It is actually number 1, the Lakers. If Scott was given a superpower, not that he isn't powerful all on his own, but if he was given a superpower, what would be the one he would request? A, invisibility. B, the ability to fly. Or 3, super wisdom. 1, 2, or 3? He actually said 3. He would like to have wisdom. If you were to drive any car in the world, Scott, what would you pick? Would he pick number 1, a Cadillac, number 2, a 1960 VW Bug, or number 3, one that runs, seats 12s, and has a good air conditioning and high miles per gallon? 1, 2, or 3? He actually said 3.
You all know why I need 12 seats, right? 10 kids.
We asked Scott to pick a pet peeve that he would choose to eliminate from the earth. He got very, very cosmic on this one. Number 1, people who talk loudly on their cell phones in public.
Especially at the Florida League of Cities conference.
Number 2, world hunger. Or number 3, people who interrupt you when you're talking. Is it number 1, number 2, or number 3? It's actually number 2. He would like to eliminate world hunger, which I saw as a blight, but he saw as a pet peeve. So now we know a little bit about Scott, but let me tell you just a little bit more. As many of you realize, Scott Payne has a PhD from Syracuse University, go Big Orange. He is an associate professor of communications and government at the University of Tampa, and is also a faculty member with the Center of Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida. You may also know that he is a former elected official serving on the Tampa City Council from 1991 to 1999, and as I learned today, actually had his name on the board on the Mons Venus Adult Entertainment Center.
It wasn't for Customer of the Week.
It was not for Customer of the Week. He is also a published gentleman, and I believe that we have copies of this book here. Everyone in the room will get a free copy of this book at the conclusion of the program. They are located at the table here to my left, your right, so please pick one up when you leave. It's very interesting. He is also an ordained deacon in the Roman Catholic faith. He and his wife, Carol, I find this so romantic, have celebrated 32, as he put in, this is what he told me, 32 wonderful years of marriage at the end of this year, and I just think that's absolutely fabulous. They are also the parents of 10 children, ranging in age from 42 to 7, and that includes 7 adopted children. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Dr. Scott Payne.
Marianne and I, as you might imagine, must have had a very enjoyable exchange of emails in preparation for this session. And she asked me those questions so she could play this game, and I asked her to respond to some of them, but I won't tell you her answers. However, when she responded to my request for her answers, she parenthetically said, oh, these speakers, they expect you to do everything for them. He probably wants only the green M&Ms in his dressing room. I was waiting to pick up a rent-a-car with my daughter who's 20, and I was sharing this story. We were laughing about it. I got home from a meeting last night, and sitting at my place at the table is a cup of green Skittles with a note from my daughter, you see, Dad, I do listen. Well, we're going to talk about something we all should be thinking about and talking about, ethics, from a somewhat different vantage point than I think we often do. And so that's the reason that we decided to do this particular program here at the Florida League of Cities. Let me just take a quick show of hands. How many of you remember having had a class in high school or college that was devoted significantly to ethics? Okay, so just look around. So you see that's less than half of us, I think. Second question, how many of you remember anything that you learned in that class? Okay. We don't, there's a hand back there, I'm glad. Some teacher was very successful then, right? We tend to, unfortunately, minimize this. I teach ethics to some extent, do teach some classes in ethics in my classes at the university, and it's amazing to me how today's college student has never had a class that dealt with ethics in high school, and many of them will get through college without ever having had a class in ethics. No wonder we have the problems that we have. So we're going to take this pursuit of an understanding of ethics very seriously and practically. I'm going to give you a broad picture of what's involved so that you understand what we're talking about, give you some tools, and then we're going to practice. So you're going to get to participate in the process. Right? So let's take a look, first of all, at what it is that ethics is not. Okay? What is ethics not? Well, it's not abstract, and it's not irrelevant. In fact, the field of ethics is that field of philosophy that is most directly applied. It's all about application. So it's not irrelevant. It's also not a matter of personal preference. Though we live in what scholars call the postmodern era, and here in the postmodern era there is this sense of uncertainty about what people should value and what's good and what's bad, nonetheless, most people who practice the field of ethics as scholars would say there are some reasonable claims about ethical conduct and there are some totally unreasonable ones. So it's not merely, if I like it, it's ethical. And it's also not about what's best for me. This is the one I have the greatest difficulty educating my students about, because when we start dealing with ethical problem solving, their answer will be, well, that one will make me money, so it's ethical. And that's obviously not what ethics is about, which is not to say you can't make money and be ethical. It's just to say that those two things aren't mutually defining. There's a lot more going on. All right, what else is ethics not? It's not simply following ethics laws. It's not. Those who equate law with ethics are called ethical legalists and are sharply criticized by ethicists because those two things aren't necessarily the same either, any more than making money and being ethical. So let me give you an example. There are actions that are lawful but are not ethical according to many standards. You can, for example, as a city council member or a mayor, propose that some policy be adopted because you like the people in that neighborhood and it will help them. And it will not benefit a neighborhood that really may need those services, but you don't care. That's not illegal, but it is unethical to just take care of the people we like and to stick it to the people we don't. But you can get away with it. It's not illegal, right? Give you another example of the kind of issues we deal with here. There are actions that are ethical that may violate ethics laws or other laws. My favorite here in Florida are lots of things that are now illegal for you, and when I was a council member, for me, that are in no way unethical. My friend Mike Suarez, where are you, Mike? Mike, where'd you go? Maybe he slipped out. I thought he was going to stay. A colleague of mine from council, he didn't serve on council when I was on council. We've been friends for 25 years. If we were both serving on council, what is the thing that it would be illegal for us to do? Talk together about anything related to city business. Is that inherently unethical behavior? Of course not. You talk with colleagues you respect. If you could, if you had permission, you would talk with colleagues you respect about their thoughts and ideas. You would try to think your way through a problem by tapping their knowledge, and you'd hope you'll share something with them. That's smart, and it's illegal in Florida. We wonder about that thought, right? So there clearly are things that, because of ethics law in Florida, the way we think about it, are perfectly ethical behavior. In fact, they're really good things to do, but they're illegal, so don't do them. And when you go to the ethics workshops and we talk to you about ethics laws, these are the things you have to worry about because you don't want to break the law. That's true. There also are some things that may be ethically required. They're not merely ethical. They may even be things that an ethical person will feel like they must do, but they are illegal. And there's a little picture here in the corner of the screen. Once upon a time here in the South, we had laws that prohibited people of color from drinking from certain water fountains, going to certain bathrooms, eating at certain lunch counters, going to certain schools. And I think everyone in this room would say that those laws were fundamentally unethical. And if we were active in that time and able to make a difference, we would, as ethical people, stand up against such laws. My point is this. We can't look at the law books in Florida or the U.S. Code or any place else to find out what is ethical, because that's not what the law is about. There's a connection, but it's far from perfect. We can't simply rely on the law to tell us what ethical behavior is. All right, so I've told you what ethics is not, just to try to get some of those ideas out of our heads. What is ethics? Here are two sort of casual definitions from college-level textbooks, the kinds of things we use when we're trying to get students to begin to understand ethics. Moral principles for living and making decisions. Principles for making decisions, very applied. How do I know the right thing to do? Or the study of what we ought to do. Ethics is the study of how do I make that decision to figure out the right thing, not the most profitable, not the most politically astute, but the right thing, if there is a right thing to do. So when we talk about ethics, we're talking about something that's very relevant to our practice, because most of us, I think, at the end of the day, when we're brushing our teeth and we look at ourselves in the mirror, we don't want to look at someone in the mirror and think that that person is not a respectable person, not a decent person, not a caring person, not an ethical person. But it's not always easy to figure out what we ought to do, which is why there's a field of study called ethics. Well, the foundation for ethics work is all about values. We have to start with what it is that we value. And this is where, in this era, in the postmodern era, there's a lot of freedom for people to assess what should be valued and to value it and bring it into their ethical consideration. So, in one sense, ethics begins with whatever it is that you value. So you can bring in friendship, you can bring in popularity, you can bring in respect for others, you can bring in concern for the poor, you can bring in a variety of different things, as long as those are clearly things that you could defend as being things you ought to value. And obviously they have to be things that are relevant to what we're talking about. I love dark chocolate, but that's not relevant to most of the decisions I made as a council member. So it's a value, but it's not relevant. We pick the right values. We really tend to focus on, in ethics, what we would call moral values, but I want you to keep that concept very broad. Because when we use the phrase moral values, we often begin to narrow that dramatically into a very small number of things that we, maybe we learned in Bible school, or that we learned at the knee of our mother or our father, some clear-cut principles, values of things that were supposed to be good. And that's fine, but there are other things, broader things that may not immediately strike us as being about morality, but that are about what's good and what's bad. And those are what we really mean by moral values. Well, let's just practice this a little bit. Tell me, and I'm going to ask Mary Ann now, so you're going to have to show hands, and she's going to come to you. Give me a value that you would bring into ethical decision-making in your own life. Forget the fact that you're a public official. Just think about the values that you would bring into that conversation.
I would bring in the value of truthfulness.
Truthfulness.
I would bring in the value of compassion for others.
Compassion.
Fairness.
Fairness.
Anybody over here while I'm here? Don't make me run back across the room. Okay.
Honesty.
Honesty. Another suggestion, too.
I guess this is connected with honesty, justice being giving each person what is his due.
Okay. Justice in the broader sense than criminal justice.
Maybe you already said it in a different form, but equality.
Equality. Okay, this wasn't hard. And I'm guessing if I were to poll the room, that this list of values, everyone would say, oh yes, I value truth. Can you imagine in any public setting, a public official saying, I don't value honesty? I mean, you just can't go there. Doesn't matter what you actually think. That's a compulsory. Yes, I value honesty, absolutely. But also, equality and fairness and justice. We would hope that we ourselves and every person who ever accepts the responsibility of public service would value these sorts of things. And in fact, we'd hope that our coworkers in our workplace and our children in our families and our neighbors down the street, that these would be values we would all share, that they would be, if you will, universal. So even in an era where we say we're not sure what the values should be, we pretty quickly default to a set of values we all agree with. There are some things that human beings, at least within broad parameters, all think make sense as things to be valued. But then we have to talk about the values that are relevant to being a public servant. Now, obviously those are, but being a public servant is a special situation that brings special value responsibilities. It's not just what we value personally that needs to factor into our consideration of making ethical decisions as public servants. We have what are called in the field role morality to worry about, which leads to role ethics. That is, an ethics that's specifically related to the fact that we are in public office. Different than what we have to consider when we're acting as a private citizen. Among other things, you have to worry about the values of your constituents. And there are times when, as a public servant, you know where you want to go, if you were king or queen, or benevolent dictator, as Marianne said. Or then there's the constituents' values, which are a little different, and you have to respect them and honor them in some way. So as a public servant, we take on an obligation to value, to some extent at least, what our constituents value, because we are their representatives, right? Not something you worry about when you're running your own business or your own household. And then there are things called institutional values. As a mayor, if you are a mayor, I would suggest to you, you have a special obligation to honor and protect the institution that is your city. And that means that some of your decisions are constrained by honoring and respecting the charter. And there are things you know you could do and probably wouldn't hurt anything if you did them, and maybe it would be a good outcome, but you won't do them ethically because you recognize the limits of your authority or the extent of your authority. Same thing for council members, but somewhat less extent. When we assume the mantle of public responsibility, you take an oath, right? And the oath says you're going to uphold the charter and bylaws of your city. Before you took that oath, you were under no such obligation. You didn't have to value the charter of your city. And some of you maybe ran saying it wasn't a good charter. But now, sworn in under that charter, you have an obligation not to say it can't be changed, but to honor and uphold it. Institutional values that we have to pay attention to as public servants that as private citizens are not important to us at all. And perhaps, I would suggest absolutely, but I'll make it perhaps, there are collective goods. These are things that can best or only be produced by cooperative effort, by groups of people, and are distributed to all people, sometimes whether or not they contribute. And being a public servant, we have to worry about those more than individual citizens. As a public servant, I know this is hard for some of us, and I know this is frustrating at times, but you have an obligation to defend the idea of taxes. Don't you? I'm not going to ask if anybody's ever said that I will never raise a tax, and maybe that's a reasonable claim to make. But if you have an obligation to meet the needs of the city through the institution of the city that you ran for and took an oath for, you're going to need revenue from somewhere. And that is taxes and fees, right? And so you need to convince people that it's good for them to pay for the collective good. And some people to pay more, perhaps, under some circumstances, and some less. I don't know very many private citizens who ever go there, but at some level as a public servant, suddenly you get to carry that particularly heavy mantle around. You have to explain why you're going to increase the cost of the parking meter, because if you don't, your bond rating will go through the floor, right? I mean, these are things that you acquire. They're things you come to value because you are a public servant. And these are exactly the kinds of things we talk about when we talk about role ethics and role morality. Point is, that means you must behave somewhat differently as a public servant in order to be ethical than you must behave as a private citizen. It's actually a shift. And that's not always obvious to us. All right, so I've challenged you now. Let's shift gears. Can you think of some things that, as a public servant, you value that you would not necessarily value in your private capacity? I've thrown some examples out. Can you think of some? I see a hand back there. I think there's a hand back here, Marianne. Or maybe there's one over here, too. That's fine. Sorry. Okay, good. Okay. Objectivity. In our private conversations, we can be passionate and one-sided, and it's fine. I'm sorry? Super voters. Fair, I said the values that matter are the ones that we value, and you probably don't care about super voters when you're not in office, but these are the folks who vote for every election no matter what, right? They show up at, if there's an election to decide whether or not a rain gutter will be put on town hall, they'll be there. And yeah, you care about them, what they think. So how important it really is? The weight, okay.
Do I have
The actual importance of the issue.
anyone over in this group while I'm here?
I'm sure none of your council meetings have ever been hijacked by something that 3 days later you said, why did we spend 2 hours talking about that? Never, right? Okay.
To be deliberative.
To be deliberative. Deliberation.
Who else?
Take one more.
Anybody over here? I'm sorry?
Sensitivity.
So I'm not picking on you, sir, but so you're saying you're insensitive in your private life, but you feel like you need to be sensitive. You hear my point, right? Now, I'm assuming you're a sensitive gentleman. In all cases. Okay. We'll say in all cases, right? Why not? So point well taken, yes. Is there something unique about sensitivity in public life that you'd like to help me reframe that a little?
Give me a moment.
We're giving him a moment.
Probably a subject matter that may not be as personal to you as it would be to someone else.
And taking it seriously anyway?
Right, correct.
Yeah, okay. That's good. I thank you for clarifying that. So sensitivity to others' concerns in a way that you wouldn't, not that you'd be insensitive, but yeah, you would listen to that person talk for whatever period of time about this thing that really, really it's not that important, but as a public official, treating them with that respect. Okay, you get the idea. And this is an important shift for a lot of us. I talk to folks about this frequently in public service, that because we all want to say, I'm an ethical person. I'm actually very careful about that because I'm not. I try to be, but I'm not. And it's not hard for me to remember a decision I made 2 or 3 weeks ago that did not meet the standard of ethics I think I should be living by. So I'm not. We want to be. And we want to think it's just the same thing everywhere because we're the same person, we're consistent regardless, right? Different roles require different kinds of ethical judgment. And we have to take that into account as public servants because the ethical rules really are different. And we need to value some things we otherwise might not. Let's talk about facts. So we've talked about values, we need to talk about facts, then we'll talk about process. The facts that we're dealing with guide us in figuring out which values are relevant. What is the issue before us, tells us or helps us figure out which values do we need to bring to this particular table. They obviously tell us what decision or decisions must be made. What is it we have to decide about? We look at the facts, we know that. And they can be a guide to evaluating what decision to make because ethics is about the real world. My favorite illustration of this, honesty came up pretty quickly on our list of personal values, right? Honesty and truthfulness. Okay, so it's a stereotype, it's a cliche, I'll apologize for that, but what is the ethical answer to the question a woman asks a man, does this outfit make me look fat? I mean, if the answer is no, absolutely not, because no, absolutely not, you look stunning in that outfit, cool, easy, nice. But ethics is never a challenge when doing the right thing also gets you all the rewards. The reason there's a field of ethics is that doing the right thing sometimes is not rewarding, and we need to know why we would ever choose to do something like that. So I value honesty. I value the feelings of my friend. What's the right answer? It's complicated. So we have we have to think carefully about how to deploy the values given the facts of the conversation we are having. What's important, and you've heard these kinds of conversations, people talk about things like lifeboat ethics. You know, we throw all the ethical rules out in a lifeboat situation. And there are some people who think that's correct. I'm going to be one of those people to tell you it's not. There are debates about this in ethics, but a lot of us would say to you, look, if it's valued, it's valued. And if it's relevant, it's relevant. So you don't get to throw it out because it's inconvenient. Or worse, because there's no way that you can honor all the values that are relevant to the decision you're about to make. I use this illustration with my students to make the point. If you value human life, period, and you think that killing a human being is always a tragic thing, and you don't have to value that, I personally do, some people do. If you value that, and you are a police officer, and you are skilled with a scope and a rifle, and you are a marksman on the SWAT team, and there's a hostage situation, you know where I'm going. There's a decision that gets made to kill that hostage taker at some point, because that's the best available path. I don't know if we have folks from law enforcement here. I will tell you from my experience and from working with chaplains in law enforcement that very, very few officers who kill someone in the line of duty doing the right thing are without remorse for having taken a human life. And they need help and support and counseling in doing exactly what we're talking about. Not, he deserved it, I'm glad you offed him. You're right. It is tragic that in the set of circumstances, the best choice involved the taking of a human life. And you made the best possible decision, but it was costly to you as well as to the person you killed. That speaks to the truth of that person's heart. That speaks to what they know in their gut. And it tells us that even when our values are inconsistent with the circumstances, even when they're inconvenient, even when we can't find a way to honor them all, being ethical means we acknowledge that there is no good outcome and we seek the best available outcome and accept a degree of regret that we couldn't find a better path. So they don't change the rules. Facts have to be dealt with, but they don't change ethical rules. Okay, let me introduce to you now some ethical principles to help you work with this process of facts and values. What ethical principles do are they're a guide for applying our values to the particular facts of the ground. How do we make this decision in light of these facts and the values we're bringing to the table? You might also think of them, if you have a more methodological perspective, as a process or a method for deciding how to apply your values to the facts in a particular situation. And let me introduce you to a set. These come from a number of ethical traditions. When I do this in other contexts, I always say, look for the one that resonates with you, because there are good arguments for all of these. And there are criticisms of all of these. It's fine. So look for the one that resonates with the way you see the world, that you feel comfortable defending, and that you feel comfortable living with as your guide. So here we go. First one of these, the greatest good for the greatest number, while doing the least harm possible. If I take that second phrase off, you may recognize it more readily. Okay, does anybody know what this is? This is a particular tradition. Sorry? Star Trek borrows on this. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. And then, of course, in the next movie, they say, the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. And, right, okay. Yes, they do borrow upon this. Supposedly Vulcan, but actually Earth beings came up with this idea. This is utilitarianism, foundational in much of free market economics. The underpinning of the valuing of a free market in part, is that a free market, given certain limitations and constraints, whatever, will generate the greatest good for the greatest number. That's the claim. Agree or disagree, but that's a common claim about the free market. But what quickly becomes apparent when you start looking at those phenomena is that some people pay a huge price so that many can benefit. And so it was John Stuart Mills, who's a little bit later utilitarian, who said, but you've got to qualify that greatest good for the greatest number with, while doing the least harm possible. Okay, so making a decision at council, weighing the alternatives, which one's going to provide the greatest good for the greatest number without doing too much harm. Not a bad guide. How do I know what the greatest good is? Go look at those values. How do I know which outcome produces it? Go look at the facts on the ground. Follow it? See how it would work? So there's one. Here's another one. Do that which avoids both the extremes of too much and too little. Don't be too hot. Don't be too cold. My favorite example coming off of my stereotype story is don't be too honest. There is such a thing. This is Aristotle, so-called golden mean, finding that middle point. And so this is a compromise kind of perspective, but compromise from a high value perspective. Not I'm giving up things to get what I want, but I've got things in conflict, interests and values that I'm trying to balance, and that's what I'm going to seek is balance, so that all the things I value are honored. All the things I should value as a public servant are honored. And to do that, I'll have to honor each of them a little bit less than perfectly. But that's better than tipping too far in one direction. So some of us will approach a problem before council and try to strike the bargain, negotiating the values. Some of us sitting in the mayor's office with conflicting interests in the city or outside will try to find a way to strike the balance. That's where this comes from. That's this idea of not too much, not too little, a reasoned balance in light of your values and the facts. Here's another one. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. The golden rule, Jesus of Nazareth, right? And so I'm not going to say much about this except to offer you a caution, believe it or not, a caution about this rule. Okay? And the caution is this. You don't know what others want. A study recently came out that indicates, for example, that people who have grown up in poverty see the world differently than people who have grown up in affluence. Do you want to know one of the most interesting differences? According to this study, people who've grown up in poverty have greater empathy for the suffering of others than people who've grown up with affluence. And the suggestion is that's because people who have affluence have never understood real suffering. You don't know what it's like to be that other person. So this beautiful principle needs to be qualified with a recognition that you better be sure the other is in these ways like you before you apply this rule to them. Do that which you can justify, not rationalize. You know the difference? Justification is when you can give good, compelling arguments for doing what you have done. In other words, you can demonstrate that it was just. Rationalizing is coming up with arguments to make you feel better about a bad decision you already made. So we're not talking about rationalizing the decision after you've already kind of decided what you want. Talk about, okay, what is the right decision? Can I explain this to myself and to others? And, notice, I'm willing to take complete responsibility for that. I will say it's the right decision, here's why, and I'll fall or stand on that decision, period. I won't blame anybody else if I get taken down. It's mine, all mine. That's an existentialist philosopher from France by the name of Jean-Paul Sartre, writing in the 1950s. Not a bad guide when you're not quite sure how else to think about things. Is okay, at the end of the day, if I have to stand up in front of whatever audience, can I explain myself? Am I willing to stand up for this position and take whatever comes no matter what? Okay, if you get there, you probably made a good decision from an ethics standpoint. Do that which you want every person to do as if required by law. This is the so-called categorical imperative of Immanuel Kant from the 19th century. The point of this one, the primary reason I like this one, because it's not clear that there are a lot of categorical imperatives. There are not a lot of things we're all obligated to do under all circumstances. There just aren't a lot. But this is a great antidote to this behavior. And I hope, well, I know you probably have done this because I know I've done it, and I'm assuming we're kind of similar. Say, it's okay for me to do this. I wouldn't want that person doing this. I wouldn't trust them. But I can trust me with this. I can trust me with this power. But I wouldn't want to trust them over there. So it's okay for me to have it, but not other people who could otherwise have it. It's okay for me to do this particular kind of bargain, kind of behind the scenes, kind of backdoor, whatever, because I'm an ethical person. But I wouldn't want other people doing this because I'm not so sure they're ethical. If you ever find yourself kind of thinking that way, it's okay because it's me. From this standpoint, it's not okay because you are violating that sense of universality, that anybody faced with the same situation should do what you're doing as if by law. So that's the caution more than anything else that this particular model from Immanuel Kant offers. One last thing about principles, and then I want to get you into some practice. Reason versus intuition. There are some ethicists, not a small number of them, who'd say ethics is all about this. It's cognitive, it's the brain, it's thinking, it's reasoning through. You got to be rational, you got to be calculating, you got to calculate it all out. You think that utilitarian, right? That which does the greatest good for the greatest number sounds like a calculator, sounds like a machine. While minimizing the harm, that also sounds like a machine. It's a calculation. Okay. And it's not an unreasonable position because our emotions can get in the way. Our desires and our feelings can make us have a difficult time seeing what is ethical and can lead us to make poor judgment. So there's some merit in this notion of ethics being a head process. But there are other ethicists who'd say, yeah, but we can't ignore that other side of the human condition which also helps us make good decisions. You want to call that intuition. You want to call that conscience, that gut feeling that this is just wrong or this is just right. And it's so strong, excuse me. And it's so strong, you can't ignore it. You check it to see whether, well, I feel that way because it's what I want, because that could be. And no, that's not it. It's just, you just know, I'm sorry, I just know this is the right thing to do. Okay, that's conscience or intuition, or it can be a faith perspective, whatever it might be. And there are ethicists who embrace that too and say, combine them. Combine them. It's not irrational, it's a non-rational component to the process of ethical decision-making, to consult that, whatever it is that you turn to, for an insight that transcends your own reason. And that's not an unethical thing to do, according to many ethicists. I'd be one in that category. Right? Giving you some framework, let's practice. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to encourage you to, as I give these to you, to grab a couple, 3 people around you and chat for a couple minutes, and then we're going to see where we go. Because the idea here is for you to wrestle with these real-world problems that can arise for public officials at the municipal level. And I'm not going to say to you that there's a right answer. I'm going to say to you there are answers that we can make sense of from an ethical standpoint based on which values we bring, what principles we apply. So there's some room for disagreement. I'm also going to say to you there's some arguments that you might be inclined to make that we're all going to know, no, just can't do that. But I want you to wrestle with it. So here's our first one. Maybe this has actually happened to you. Maybe it hasn't. The parking ticket. Here's the fact summary. I have parked illegally. So embarrassed. I was just running into the bank or the bakery, or I went to see a constituent or whatever it was, but I parked illegally. No harm has resulted. There wasn't an accident. The fire engine wasn't denied access to a burning building. No harm. I didn't keep anything. I didn't park in a handicapped spot and keep a handicapped person from getting in the building, and nothing. Nothing happened. As I'm coming out of whatever my errand was, someone is writing me the ticket. Or in the city of Tampa, they're pushing the buttons and tickets being spit out of the machine. But when the officer sees me, and of course recognizes me as councilman or mayor, they rip up the ticket, close the book, say, "Oh, great to see you, councilman," or "Great to see you, mayor. Sorry, I didn't know that was your car." Here's the question. Should I allow the officer not to give me a ticket? Now, I want you to talk about it. And I don't want you to tell me yes or no. I want you to tell me why. From the standpoint of applying a principle of ethics, you saw some there to work with. You've got the handouts if you want them, you can go back to refer to. Thinking about the facts on the ground. Tell me what the values are that you're bringing into this decision. Don't just go with the gut. I'm not saying that's the wrong answer. I'm just saying know why it might be the right answer. So take a moment, talk amongst yourselves, see if you all have the same ideas. What would be the ethical thing to do and why? We'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And then I'll have Marianne come around and talk to somebody. One thing I can always count on is I say, talk to each other. I know it's going to happen. I'm going to ask you to redirect your attention our way. And what I'm going to do now is, if your group had an interesting discussion, 2 or 3 people, whatever it was, and you had an interesting discussion you'd like to share with us about this, pop your hand up so Marianne can see you. Oh, right here, Michael, welcome. I mentioned you, and I think you weren't here.
I wasn't here, but I apologize for coming a little late. Scott, the exact scenario you described, except for the tearing up the ticket, happened to me about a month ago.
Mike Farr is a council member in the city of Tampa. I mentioned him a little earlier.
And I will say this. There's 2 reasons why, if he had torn it up, I would have told him to continue to write it and to give me the ticket. 2 reasons. One is I was wrong and I was speeding. That's really the basic reason why, I think one of the easiest rules of thumb is to know if you've broken the law and you are a citizen, you should follow the same rules as every other citizen. Now, that's my personal feeling about it. But secondly, my 2 children were in the car. And so when the police officer got my license and everything, he said, well, my children, 12 and 9, were telling me, tell him that you're a city councilman. Maybe he won't give you a ticket. Well, my first reaction, of course, is, well, no, he's doing his job, and I was speeding, and I don't have an excuse for speeding, so he has to do his job, and you have to accept, living in the city and following the rules of the city, you have to accept the consequences for breaking those rules. So had my children not been there, I don't know if I would have answered it the same way. But I'll tell you, when I heard you say that, I thought, my God, that just happened to me. So,
didn't you know I had a video camera on you? We were seeing what you were up to.
Well, and the most distressing thing, of course, is that someone knew you more than they knew me, Scott. But that's a whole other story. But that's what I would have done.
Thank you.
And let me share with you that the mayor of Ocoee has come up because they're concerned about your propensity to break the law, and he's giving you a get-out-of-jail-free card in Ocoee. Now, I hope you can accept that. Anyway.
All
Okay,
right,
who else do we have?
I saw hands over here, and there's there a hand over here somewhere too? Okay, so we've got two groups there. We'll go with those.
Come on up, come.
Now remember, I'm going to give you the ground rules, which my dear friend Mike broke, which is you need to be clear to us about what the values are you're bringing to the conversation, and tell us about the ethical principle you're using to sort this out. You'll draw on one of those principles we talked about, okay?
Our group discussed no special treatment for a public official. One of my filters, and actually as we talked, it was all of ours, that if we can't stand at our neighbor's door and say what we've done and be proud of it, then we're not going to do it. So that ticket should have been written. But I have something to add to that because we have a rather aggressive DIB in the downtown area. Would you insist that they write a ticket if you were parked in a 1-hour parking on city business and you were still getting a ticket if you were a few minutes late? That's the question. So you're carrying out your duties. How do you handle that?
Okay, so there's a nice, interesting twist on that. We'll see where people want to go with that.
Okay.
We've got one here.
All right.
Thank you. As I think everyone would agree, the ticket should be written, but there's a principle of integrity involved on both the officer and the council member in this case, that you have to still do what's right. In fact, that you broke the law, take responsibility for it, and the officer still needs to be held accountable for doing his job, and then his job is writing you a ticket. But to add another little twist to that is, no matter what we do, there's always perception involved. So if we're the only ones there, we still have to follow our integrity. No one's watching, but if someone is watching, how do you hold other people accountable now when you weren't held accountable to begin with?
Okay, thank you.
All right, and we're going to head down here.
There's got one over here I saw. I don't know if there's one in this group.
There was somebody down here I saw a hand up. Don't be shy now. Come on. You made the old woman run this far. Come on.
I just say this. Under our charter, we're not allowed to tell employees what to do. So how can we tell the officer to write the ticket or to not write the ticket?
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Yeah. What's your name?
Ben Bukhari from the city of Alachua.
I'm sorry, say again?
Ben Bukhari, city of Alachua.
Okay, Ben, stay with us for a second. I mean, this is beautiful because if you were a private citizen, not a member, you're a council member, right?
Yes, sir.
If you were a private citizen, not a council member, and you came out and whoever it was writing the ticket, would you have any qualms about telling them what to do?
I've been written a ticket before, so I didn't have any qualms in St. Augustine. Anybody from there?
Okay, so in the private capacity, it's a little bit like basketball, right? You're in position, but you're not really in position, and they run into you, but they legitimately can, but don't let you fall back because they charged you, right? You're gaming the ref, right? And in sports, all sorts of sports. I used to be a soccer referee. All sorts of sports. There's all this sort of gaming in the gray areas, right? Trying to tip it just a little bit your way, and we accept that in sports competition. So the private citizen coming to the parking person, the person handling the parking ticket, might say, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, my wife was in, she's having an x-ray because we think her leg is broken. I'm sorry, I'll move my car right away. And, play to the sympathy, it was a charge. And we would all go, okay, that's the game, right? But as a city official, forget how you feel. You just told us your charter says you can't tell them what to do. So, all right, so they're ripping it up. Is that okay? But you tell them not to. Is that okay? You're stuck, right? So what did you decide you were going to do?
Mum is the word.
This is great. Ben's comment, a great contrast. The gentleman who spoke a moment ago. Your name is Ben. Ben 1 and Ben 2. Okay, well, what's interesting is the contrast, because you're saying, mum's a word we don't say anything and it goes away, right? Have I got a story to tell? Thank you, Ben. That fits into this, and it's all about everything we do. It's about perception and communication. We can't avoid this. This is something I would suggest to you as a public official. You have to value, even though you don't want to, perception, because it's in the interest of the community to value it. This did happen, this true story, when I was on council. A very unfortunate incident happened one night involving the son of a council member. This council member is an African American, is the son of a civil rights leader. He himself had been involved actively, prominent figure in the community, also very successful. So his son, teenage son, had a very late model, nice sports car. And he and 3 of his male buddies, all African American, were driving in this late model sports car at night, and an officer came up behind them and just said, okay, let me just run the check, right? This is unusual to me to see 4 African-American teenage males driving a very late model, very expensive sports car. Let me just check it out. And you can decide however you want to deal with that issue. Here's what happened to the officer. At the same time the officer called that in, another officer was calling in another license tag check of a stolen vehicle. And the messages got crossed at dispatch. So the officer pulled my colleague's son over, who was legitimately driving his own car, not violating the law, did all the checking, and okay, on the one hand, so everything's fine, because when you see the registration and the name, it's like, oh, okay, I'm sorry, there was a mistake. It didn't go quite that smoothly for a variety of reasons. It didn't quite go that smoothly. But it all got sorted out in the end. However, it did get publicized at the council meeting, because the council member was understandably, whatever you think about these sorts of things, understandably concerned that his son had been pulled over under these circumstances, if nothing else, that the department had screwed up and somehow had crossed the messages. And so he was rather upset about it, and the department apologized appropriately, and everything was fine. You will not believe what happened in the next week. In the next week, this young man was driving home from football practice in his late model sports car. He was late. He'd stayed too long at practice hanging out with his buddies. He was a very, very fine young man. He was hurrying home because he knew his mom worried when he wasn't home on time. He was hurrying home. Euphemism for he was speeding. And so he's breaking the law. And he's caught by guess who? The same officer who pulls him over. And this is, as God is my witness, this actually happened. Officer does not make the connection. They're following hundreds of cars. He doesn't make the connection until he runs the tag before he walks up to deal with the speeding situation. It's like, good evening. Good evening, officer. How are you doing? Just fine, sir. You realize you're going kind of fast? Yes, sir, I was. I apologize. Why are you going so fast? Well, my mom worries when I'm home late and I stay too late at football practice, so I'm just trying not to be late. Your mom's going to worry a lot more if you don't ever come home. Yes, sir. Slow down. Go home. Have a good night. Thank you, officer. No ticket. Every night in every city in the United States, those things happen, right? Officers have legitimate due discretion on whether to give a warning or a citation. No question, that's within their professional prerogative. Unfortunately, I know this story. I don't mean that's unfortunate. Why do I know this story? Because somebody picked it up off the police blotter, off of a conversation they overheard, and it was in the paper. And the following council meeting, a gentleman was there with 3 speeding tickets demanding that they be fixed like the council member's son's speeding ticket was fixed. The point being, this is the trap we're all in. We simply cannot extract ourselves from this reality of public service. One of those things we must value, we must understand and value as a public servant that we don't care about as a private citizen. Perception. Nothing that happened that night was inappropriate in any way. I don't think the officer didn't give the kid a ticket because it was the councilman's son. I think he didn't give him a ticket because of the way the young man handled the interaction, and it was, okay, fine, I'm not worried, you're going to slow down, it's fine, give the warning, we move on. But it didn't play that way. And is there a right answer to that? I don't know what it is, but it's the dilemma we constantly face. And the gentleman here wants to make a comment then.
How come it was all right for the officer to use discretion in the speeding ticket, but not okay to use discretion in the parking ticket?
Exactly. I didn't say that was wrong. I posed it to you, right? So you heard the question. So, okay, the gentleman said, well, okay, if the officer could use due discretion in this case, why can't the person enforcing the parking rules? And part of the answer is, well, who has what discretion? I don't know. There's a legal part of that. But exactly. And it comes back to making that careful consideration of your own about the values that are in play and the issues that are in play, remembering that one of the things you've got to consider is that sense of perception. We'll take another comment, and we're going to go on to another example. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 comments. Because great Scott back there, Mayor Scott Vandergrift.
About a year into my term, I got stopped. Actually, I had stopped to look at a drainage problem. And I was catty-cornered in an intersection. Sunday afternoon, light drizzle, looking at a drainage problem. Walked across the road to see how it was coming out the other side. Turned around, and there was 2 police cars, one in front of me, one in back of me. And I went over to the one officer there, and he says, "You having a problem?" I said, "No, sir, I just stopped to look at the drainage problem." He says, "You know I can write you a ticket, don't you?" I said, "You have to do what you have to do." He wrote me a ticket, and I fought it in court, and come to find out, the lesson learned, you can't beat 2 police officers in court.
Wait, and Marion, I think this young woman here, was there someone here in front? Do you want to speak? No, okay, we'll wait that off. Let's look at the next one, another scenario. And notice I'm not leaving you with an answer, right? Because the point of this is you have to work these things through and be comfortable with making a decision. It's not always clear what the right decision is. So, number 2, a gift from an old friend. Here's the facts. I have an old, wealthy, powerful friend in town. My adult child, graduating from college, looking for that first career job. My old, powerful friend personally offers my son or daughter a job in his or her company. Should I discourage my child from taking the job? Talk about it. What do you think? Talk about it. And bring those ethical principles to bear. Think about the values you need to deal with here. Let's see where this one goes.
Gosh, that is a very bright light. I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to ascend in a minute when I stand there.
Oh, okay.
The light is right in my face.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Sounds like we've had a lively conversation again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Three. There it goes. Okay. Sounds like we got a good lively conversation going on that one. Anytime anybody talks about messing with our kids, right? Especially when it's us messing with our kids. So let's hear the values you brought to bear, the ethical principle you tried to deploy here. Where'd you come down and how'd you get there? So,
Well, this is one of those that probably could be argued either way. But as my little group discussed, we saw nothing wrong with it because we looked at the political aspiration as a separate piece. It just because I wear the hat of mayor or councilman had nothing to do with my friend giving my son or daughter a springboard or a job. Had I been head janitor, it wouldn't have mattered. But my best friend did something for me, okay? So there was no financial gain between myself and that friend of mine. So we saw it as being nothing wrong with that. It was just something that was done out of the longevity of our friendship, okay? And they wanted to help me out.
So no harm, no foul here.
No harm.
Okay. All right. Let's hear some other ideas.
We agree to a point, and I think the defining line there is the friend. What role do they play? If the friend's company in any way could do any kind of business with me as a city manager or elected official, would strongly discourage it because of the fact of what it would look like my child getting a job with a firm that could or did do business with the municipality or the county. If this friend was from out of state and we went to college together.
In town,
but business has nothing to do with what I do, then I'm a father. And if I've got a kid at home who's done school and I'm trying to get the hell out of the house, if anybody can help me get him out, I'm looking to get him out.
And I will confess parenthetically, I have a 21-year-old graduating in December, and I feel your pain. He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
Is this on?
It is, yep.
We looked at it similarly. The facts that were given didn't really tell you whether it would go well or go badly, but we were talking about all the other variables that could change it from being very unfavorable to very favorable.
For example?
Well, for example, if the daughter was taking a job where she was the representative to the city, appearing constantly before your commission, that it probably wouldn't be a good idea. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if there was that level of separation that the previous gentleman was talking about, your friend might actually be hiring him or her because they want to hire people they know from a good family, and if they value yours as a good family, that's their safest hire. So there's a lot of other variables, I suppose, that could change this.
And let me pick up on that for a second, just because, again, we want to hear these challenges that we face. Are you a mayor? Are you a mayor? Commissioner, okay. We're going to make you mayor just for a moment. Where is the mayor here? Is your mayor here? Okay, so we're safe. Suppose that, and Marion, would you bring the mic back around for him for a second? Suppose that you're the mayor and you have a position open and the son or daughter of your good friend wants that position. And it's an exempt, the executive kind of privilege of hire, right? You know the good family, you know who it is, where he or she comes from and all that. As mayor, would you feel that there wouldn't be an ethical problem with you hiring, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, I'm just asking the question, I'm reframing this. Would it be okay for you as mayor to hire the son or daughter of your best friend, assuming there's no legal impediment to this?
I suppose it would depend partially on what my friend's part in the community was. You had this fellow here who was very wealthy, and he lives right there in town, and presumably that means he owns land, and therefore everyone's going to know he owns land, and he's constantly having to come to the city for one permit or another. But on the other hand, I think it would be the perception problem, that even if it was totally clean and it was totally exempt position, people would say, oh my gosh, look at this, ingrown group of people that are controlled, right, the good old boy network.
Yeah, it's one step away from nepotism kind of thing. The reason I made that point is earlier I had said there are things you must value as a public servant that you don't have to value as a private citizen, and this is your conversation about your friend hiring your son or daughter. The way you talked about it illustrated exactly that reality of it's fine for your friend to hire, but if the roles are reversed and you're the mayor, it's at least problematic in a way that it isn't for your friend. And that helps to illustrate, again, this idea of, as a public servant, their values we have to hold on to that as a private citizen we don't have to worry about. Not just because of the law, but because of the perceptions of public concerns. Okay, who else wants to respond on this particular scenario, near and dear to the hearts of those of us with college-age children or young adults?
And we put forth a caveat that if the child is qualified for the job.
You want the child to actually be able to do the job?
And then my friend has determined that obviously he is qualified. And we also considered that it's a job, and if he doesn't perform, then he's subject to termination also. It's an opportunity for him.
Okay, good, thank you. Other people want to join in on this, so Rand, go ahead.
Let me just take it a little bit further. What if the individual, whoever is being hired, happens to be an expert in a particular field that nobody else can do, or very few people are experts in, and this company has a need for this expertise? I think that probably under those circumstances it would not be a problem. Or even if it was vice versa, if the city needed this kind of expertise, this quality, what are you going to do? Just say, well, you're a friend. Now, I do have a problem if they don't, as you say, qualify. I think that's really the key issue, whether or not they're absolutely qualified to do the job that was there. And if you can justify them as being, as being qualified for the position, I think it makes it a lot easier. Not that it will get rid of the perception.
Right.
It probably won't get rid of the perception, but at least you can justify why this person was hired.
And Mayor, I'm waiting for you to use the word justify, and obviously why? Because this is one of those ethical principles I was talking about. And you, the way you framed it, you talked about if this was an expert, the most qualified clearly for the position that was available for the position. Do you feel comfortable standing up and saying that's the justification for this and I'll live or die by that? Well, yeah, the expertise. Of course, and maybe your children are those kinds of experts. I have very talented children, but I'm not sure I would call them that expert yet. Right? But if we're in that situation, what a clear justification, and we can stand by that. If it's they are qualified, are there other people in the pool that are qualified? Makes the justification weaker, not invalid. So thank you for using the word. Where do you want to go? Down here. Door number 3.
No, my MPO chair. We're going to make him happy.
Oh, okay, MPO. Yay, MPOs.
David Garofalo, City of Northport. I'm a fire captain in Pasco County. That's my, real job.
So one that pays the bills, I guess.
Yes. I have a 1-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son about to be 5. I'm never going to have this problem because my daughter's going to be in a nunnery and my son is going to be a firefighter like me. But we talked in our group, and I think the justification is if I did have that, you didn't define powerful. and what was powerful in the city. If he's on a planning and zoning board and he's in the city, or he comes in a meeting every week, or someone that's really affluent to city government, it really opens up a whole new can of worms. But if he's powerful just because he's wealthy and he just sits in the city, it may be different. But even said, we would say that we would want the qualifications to be in place, and we would want a true interview process to make sure that our son or daughter was the most qualified person for the job.
All right, so you pushed it toward the let's be sure it's a clean process. Let's be sure we can point to the process and say it was fair. And that, there's one of the answers is, okay, can we clean the process? We talk about that, in terms of some council proceedings. Can we cleanse this process? Can we make it right? That's a nice response, because that's kind of that balance thing. It's neither yes or no. It's let's make it balance the appropriate considerations, and then it's possible for them to get the job.
Hello, Sergio Escalada from the village of Palm Springs. I agree with everything that's been said. It came originally from my group. Okay, yes. I'm just going to take it one step farther. Let's assume, right, that everything that we said is correct, right? That the child, applied, is qualified, and that your friend offered the job basically for the qualifications. Well, and so you abstain basically from dealing with that transaction, but it does affect you as a city official, whether you're the mayor or not, in future things. So when that individual that may bring some issues to your city, right, now you may have to abstain from decision making because of the fact that your child works in that company, right? So you may not have a say in the actual hiring, but it will affect, and your friend may or should know that it may affect later on.
Yeah, good point, very good point.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was getting to that, and I think that's the epitome of the ethics we're talking about, is now you're talking what's your ethical and moral responsibilities as a father compared to a public servant. For me personally, I have no problem abstaining from actions that are going on to benefit my children. My priority would be my children and their well-being, and but the word I was going to use with this is transparency. Is you get up on the bench the next time and you let the public know this has happened, and any business that's being brought before the council now, I will be abstaining from. Take that perception right off the top, bring it out in the open, and just hold to it, and the transparency of it.
Gentleman here in the black, I think. And we're going to take this third one.
What's the difference between influencing this powerful person to hire your child versus influencing this powerful person not to hire your child when you tell them it'll have a perception problem for me, so I don't want you to hire my qualified child? Aren't you really doing the same thing both ways? You're influencing somebody with your position.
If we get the slide back up, you'll see why. Yeah, I hear you, and point well taken. But if we can get that slide back up, look at the way I frame the scenario. Discourage my child. I'm not trying to discourage the employer. I'm speaking to my son or daughter.
If your son or daughter is 18 years old, aren't you doing the same thing?
They're my child. I mean, my answer
They're
would
a
be this.
citizen also.
Yeah, but again, my point is this: we know, in terms of family dynamic, you have conversations. You can encourage, discourage, recommend, oppose, be adamant. That's all entirely fair game. That's why I framed it. Your point is well taken. Just like the ticket case with parking, if I'm telling someone who is not naturally someone who's in my sphere of personal influence just by nature of family, to do or not do something, there may not be any way to navigate that without exerting an inappropriate influence. But here, in the family dynamic, I'm not going to be silent. The question is, what am I going to say? But we're being unfair to our son or daughter, perhaps, if we discourage them, right? Let me pick up though, Ben. I think Ben said something here a moment ago that and what I'm about to say, I don't mean to say you're wrong. I mean to say, again, thinking about the unique values we must accept if we are public servants. Let me pose the question that you assumed the answer to. Is it appropriate for a duly elected public servant who chose to seek that office and accept the responsibilities that go with it to put the economic interests of their son or daughter above the interests of due process in the city? Ooh, did I frame that nasty? Wasn't that nasty? Here's my point. And again, don't misunderstand me, but here's where that goes. How many of you have a council that tends to divide 3-2 or 4-3 on certain key issues? And suppose I'm the swing vote, and I then end up having to recuse myself from those decisions because that's where my son or daughter got the job. We've just put the city in gridlock because I gave preference to my son or daughter. Don't misunderstand me. This is not at all easy. But as public servants, I am suggesting, I'm pushing that envelope hard. There are things we have to value that are costly to people we value. And I'll give a very personal example, not in public office. I am a Catholic deacon, so I am clergy. And so that means, especially if you're a Catholic, you will readily get this. If anybody ever says, well, Father said, it's like, well, that's it, we're done. It's a sort of Catholic mindset we're still working on overcoming. That's not the way it has to work, but Father said it, that's it. Well, deacon is just sort of a half step off that. So it's, if the deacon said it, well, that's it. I have a son and daughter who live in our parish with 4 young children. They homeschool. Their kids are smart. Brilliant, of course. And they want to jump one of the kids a year ahead in receiving the sacrament of First Communion. Can the parish grant that reasonable and probably appropriate request for their child, my grandson? And the answer, I came down, my response was no. Father said, you're right, deacon. But look at what it cost. I mean, no big deal, right? This isn't their living. This is, okay, wait another year, you'll be 7 in a year, and okay. But precisely to make the point that there are times when what's perfectly legitimate and appropriate and nobody would have a problem with this in private life suddenly becomes, is this really something I, as a public servant, and I can't get out of being a public servant, can do? Is it legitimate? And it can cost our children, our spouses, our friends, when we wrestle with those issues. I'm not saying with a right or wrong answer. As I said, this is an interesting one, and precisely because it goes to the gut at multiple levels for those of us with adult-age children, especially in these economic times. It's like, daddy's going to be pretty strong value here. But we do need to at least acknowledge and wrestle with the implications of giving priority to our concerns for our children where they might create serious conflicts or problems for the city we chose to serve. Interesting dilemma. So, fair? And I'm not picking on you at all. Telling the way it is. Okay, last one to mess with. When a conflict is not a conflict, which happens to be a kind of neat segue from a couple comments people made about, I'll just recuse myself. Remember at the beginning I said ethics is not the law, right? And that there are things in the law that are illegal that are perfectly ethical to do, like sitting down and having coffee with a friend who happens to be on council with you. But don't do that in Florida. Well, one of the other interesting dilemmas we face is how Florida law defines a conflict of interest that is the foundation for recusing yourself from a public decision. Voila. A good friend, has filed a rezoning petition. Just to make this really interesting, my friendship is not public knowledge. Nobody has to know, maybe. The rezoning is drawing strong opposition. But my professional and my public servant judgment is, having looked at this, talked to staff, we've done all the work I do in preparing for rezoning, this rezoning really should be granted. Maybe some accommodation to some of the concerns, but it really should be granted. It's a legitimate request. It's defensible. It really ought to be granted. Okay? There's the setup. What should I do? Why is this a problem before you wrestle with it? Do I, under Florida law, have a conflict of interest here? No, I do not. No, I do not. May I recuse myself from this decision? No, I may not. Florida law requires you, as council members, to vote on every issue that comes before you. If you've ever done this, or if any of your colleagues ever say, oh boy, that's a hot potato, I'm not going to vote. Or I'm really conflicted about this, so I vote abstain. Not legal in Florida. It's a violation of the law. You must vote on every issue that comes before you unless, now I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on television. This is my understanding. Unless I have a direct pecuniary, that means financial interest in the decision before me. I mean, take this to the extreme. That means if it's my son or daughter, I don't have a direct pecuniary interest in their activities, unless I'm still funding them, right? Okay? So I can't legally recuse myself from this decision. Sorry? Can't. Under Florida, those two things in Florida law. Number one, it's not a conflict. Number two, you have to vote on everything.
And Dr. Payne, I would add, because I am married to a local government attorney, and this has happened to me, while part of it is dealing with, do you have a direct financial gain by the decision? There is also, in the state of Florida, an attorney general's opinion that says that if your spouse is doing something in the community or representing a special interest, a charity, even though they're not getting any money as a board member of that charity, the Attorney General's office has said because they do that, it generates goodwill, which may have a gain for you if you're in elected office, because why wouldn't you vote for that lovely lady because her husband does all those nice things? So there,
right,
that
so
is
another,
one that's
the
only exception to that I know, and I didn't want to just
thank you. Well,
leave
that's
that not said.
So thank you, Marianne. And again, so you see the point. I'm not the thing I can't legally do is recuse myself. Okay, so what are you going to do? You talk about it.
Discuss.
Discuss.
Discuss. Discuss amongst yourselves. You have the topic.
I've been asked to restate the question, and the question is, what do I do? You know, this is a rezoning that's coming before me. I'm on the council. Here are the facts. I gave you the facts. It's a good friend's petition. I think the petition is valid. There's tremendous opposition. What do I do? Sorry?
You have to vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll be interested to see if they come up with the creative ways around that. Many of the more savvy folks I know on councils always have to go to the bathroom or have coffee.
Well, we had this lady that would leave and go hide in the IT room because that had a lock on it and the press couldn't go in there. So anytime the press was there, if she didn't want to vote, she'd go hide in the IT room.
Yep. Or plan a business trip out of town, or I mean, whether that's right or wrong. I mean, there are. The interesting thing is there are always creative strategies, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. And I'm just interested to see if people start thinking outside the box, whether they should or not, whether they should choose that or not, just to explore it.
My husband's cousin wanted to have a rezone done on a piece of property to allow his wife to have a 2-chair beauty salon. My husband had loaned him money, and there was a promissory note and this sort of thing. I went to the city attorney and I explained everything and said, what do I do? There is a business relationship there. And he said, you can't vote, but you also don't have to tell me. You just have to say there is a financial relationship between, you don't have to explain it.
Right.
Mira was like, you just didn't want to vote against your cousin. It's like, only in Bradenton will the mayor go have a hissy fit because he has a council member that follows not only the rule of the law, but the spirit of the law.
All right, let's see what you're going to do with this rezoning. I've got someone here in the back. Let's listen. Please listen. We're going to get the mic up and let's see what people came up with. Get some new voices in the conversation. Can we get the handheld mic up, please? No, we need you on tape.
Oh.
You can't project to the electronics, unfortunately.
No, you're right. I can't.
Bingo. Thank you.
What I just have I have a question, sort of like a caveat to the scenario. Okay, the scenario is you're not sure what to do, so you ask city attorney, and the city attorney says, absolutely, you can vote. And then someone brings you up on ethics charges. Mm-hmm. Are you guilty?
Well, again, given what we just described, and none of us are attorneys, so we can't give you legal advice. That, in the United States, we have this great notion that anybody can sue anybody for anything. It's freedom. It's a variation of First Amendment freedom of speech, I guess. So the first answer is, of course, you can be brought up in charges on, someone can file the complaint about anything, but at least the shared understanding we have among these lay people is no. This is not, this was intended, so the scenario was intended to be legally, actually, not only may you, but you must vote on the issue. So that, and then, yeah, somebody can bring it up on ethics charges afterward. Won't that be fun?
Yeah. Well, we had a situation in our city where one of my colleagues' father had a zoning issue come before. So not only did he report, which I think in your scenario, you should report the relationship you have with the person that's appearing before you, but still vote. In his scenario, it was he recused himself from it, and for obvious reasons that there could be a financial interest somewhere down the line because of inheritance and other things. But he did both. He reported, and then he did recuse himself. And he's the only lawyer on the board, too, so that's another issue. So.
I know what you're talking about. Right, so there are these circumstances where that financial connection may be plausible enough. Now, of course, in this case, it's not there because it's a friend. Unless you've got a business deal, which I don't have in here, there's nothing there. Grant.
In this situation, we as a group, we said that we will make sure that everyone know that is a good friend of ours. But overall opposed have come against the decision. But when we're looking at it as a council, as I'm voting, I'm looking at the overall evidence shows that it should be voted upon. So then my vote would be yes and not nay.
I appreciate everything that you just said because you did a disclosure. Okay, that makes your life more difficult, but if you didn't disclose it, maybe nobody would ever know. But ethics is sometimes costly. So that was a nice move, but I also like the fact that you were explaining the whole conversation here was you're going to explain to people what you're going to do. And of course, that will make them all understand you. But you're right. Yeah, I think one should applaud the decision to explain oneself. It comes back to that notion of justification. Okay.
Yeah, I would just like to add just one thing. I agree with the disclosure and also granting the position by justifying your position. However, you're one vote out of 5 or 3, whatever the case may be. So,
right. So you won't decide it, or at least you hope you won't. You hope it's not one of those 3-2 decisions, and you're the third vote. We're going to come down this way.
I would just add that if I were going to make a disclosure, I'd make it when in describing the situation to the city attorney, so that the city attorney can advise us on the various ways the statute could be interpreted, because there's some doubt as to whether even a pecuniary interest is required. That's in litigation now.
Yeah, okay, very good. Right, so go with the attorney, at least as a starting point. Down here, it's a hand somewhere. Down there, okay.
I would think that the first thing we would need to do would be to get our all of our decisions put together on how we come to the decision to make this thing needs to be done, not based on the fact that it's our friend bringing it, but the fact that this is what we need, and then have this proof to show this, to back us up that this is why we're doing what we're doing. It's nothing to do with the friendship. It's the betterment for the city and everybody.
I'm hearing a fairly consistent theme on this. Anybody have an alternative view? Those are all, I think, credible and intelligent thoughts and very defensible. Anybody have an alternative approach to this? Ben over here is good. All right. We're going to get the devil's advocate in the conversation.
And, you know, not that I'm sure all of our councils, we all get along, you know, hold hands and sing and all that kind of good stuff.
But the Kumbaya councils of Florida, yes, right.
Since I'm sure that a lot of the councils that we mentioned before are that 3-2 type of votes, you're going to have two people that typically do not like you and then two people that will like you. So if you disclose this, and I'm not saying that's not a good idea, but if you disclose this, now you're going to have people that because they like you are going to vote with you, and because who don't like you are deliberately going to vote against you on it. So again, I'm just throwing the devil's advocate in there. That's a possibility that could happen.
We'll take one more comment. Go ahead.
I was going to say, welcome to the lovely world of politics.
All right. Did you want, was there one more comment? Right there, actually, right next to Ben.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, to piggyback with that, you cannot, though, avoid your own ethical responsibility based upon maybe the unethical participation of your fellow council member. So in other words, if it's ethical for you to vote yes based on what you see in front of you, it is also ethical that you disclose that relationship prior and cite the basis for your affirmative vote. You can't not do that because you assume or infer that your fellow council member may vote another way. So their ethical responsibility lies with them. But you, in effect, have to have a tunnel vision and cut the peripheral off.
Okay, very good, very good. I'm going to take us to some concluding observations about this, and then we probably will have a little time for some Q&A. I will tell you that this particular scenario, a variation of this, was one of my most unpleasant moments in my 8 years on council. You know I'm a Catholic deacon. At the time I was not, but active in the Catholic Church, and it was publicly known that I was Catholic. So, of course, it was a Catholic school that had to come forward and want to rezone some property to put in an athletic field. And it had to be that the Catholic Church in Florida at the time, the Diocese of St. Augustine, back in 1964, the bishop had written a letter to the neighborhood, which was very concerned about this school and whether there would be a football stadium, promising that there never would be. A letter which is legally not enforceable. It's just a good faith promise. All of the grounds for the rezoning were solid. They'd gone out of their way to accommodate, buffer, do all sorts of stuff. But you know, there was going to be a very unpleasant conversation because the neighborhood still had the activist who was around in 1964 in 1996. Copy the letter, you bet. And I will say, because I believe in full disclosure, I will say that the Diocese of St. Petersburg at that time did not handle this well at first, and even more so the school, because it's sort of, hey, you know, we should have this after all these years, we should have our field, instead of recognizing what a mess it was. But the good news was, I was out of town at a conference when the vote came up. The bad news was it split 3-3. So when I came back, everybody knew the decision was mine. It didn't matter what anybody else had said. It all rested with me. And yeah, it was one of the more interesting and challenging moments of my professional career as a public servant. So, because I felt the evidence supported the rezoning very clearly, because I felt that the reasoned opposition had been responded to appropriately, and that we were now dealing with an unreasoned opposition, I did two things. Again, not right or wrong, this is what I did. One was, I castigated the school and the church first, because their handling of this, from the beginning, a promise was made by a church to a community to never do something. Either you never make a promise like that, or if you make it, you keep it. And I said, you know, that's really embarrassing. As a Catholic, I'm embarrassed that my diocese and this school are violating a promise we made as a church. And I find that offensive. However, it's not legally defensible. I can't make my decision based on the fact that I find that offensive. And then I laid out the evidence for the decision, all the accommodations that have been made, the arguments that have been countered, and I voted for it. And I did not get reelected. No, but in fairness, truthfully, what actually happened was when I ran, the next time I ran a couple, 3 years later, was 1999, and I ran citywide rather than in my district because our charter's 2 terms, and then you could run in the at-large district. And the opponent I drew was just wired. 4th generation Tampania, millionaire, wired to both the Republican and Democratic sides of the House, wired to the mayor. I mean, what was I thinking? To run against her. When I campaigned in this neighborhood, so this is the reason to tell this story. When I campaigned in this neighborhood, neighbor after neighbor after neighbor after neighbor said, "Thank you. This guy has made our life misery every time this school has wanted to do anything." And frankly, we like having the school here, but none of us want to go up against him because he'll be on our doorstep screaming if we say what we think. There was one non-benevolent dictator in that neighborhood association, and everybody else was rolling over for him. And so I got that precinct overwhelmingly in the election. But I lost the election. With 31,000 ballots cast, some of you know this story, 31,000 ballots cast on election night, I lost by. Best way to lose an election, because you're still incredibly politically powerful. Okay, so some concluding thoughts about ethical leadership. I've been trying to make a point about ethics here that I hope has come through, and you probably know, but sometimes we kind of need to remind ourselves, if we actually are going to take seriously the notion of being ethical leaders, it's going to cost us. It just is. And frankly, I am sure that I did lose that election in '99 in part because I had made decisions in the course of 8 years that I believed were the right decision, but that cost me votes permanently. And my opponent, of course, never having held public office, had never made any of those decisions yet, and so could run against every single one of those decisions in each of those particular parts of the city where I had offended some people. And when you only lose by 1 vote, it was only one person who had to be angry with me for that to be the case. It is. Being ethical is costly. It is, because you're going to wrestle with yourself. There's the emotional component of struggling to determine the right thing to do, because as these illustrations, I hope, have made clear, and you can undoubtedly think of other cases, it can be kind of agonizing to figure out what to do, both from the standpoint of worrying about the right thing and then worrying about what it's going to cost you when you do the right thing. It can also affect you interpersonally. Friends who are no longer your friends because you did what you believed was the right thing, and they're never going to forgive you for it. That happens in other walks of life too, but in public life it's upfront, personal, and in the newspaper. And it can be a very unpleasant experience and costly. It can cost you socially. I mean, the good thing about getting elected is you get all invited to all these things. The bad thing about being elected is everywhere you go, they chew you out for all these things, right? And so when you do what you believe is the right thing, and you explain it, and you think about it, and you try it, you're going to have people who are never going to let you go about that. And they may take it out on your spouse, or your kids, or your other relatives. And, that's a cost that's social. You benefit from, but you also pay a price. And, of course, it can be an economic problem, depending on what your line of work is, depending on what you do. So, point is, you want to be ethical? Figure that it's going to be a cost that you incur. It just is. Because, put it this way, the world is a broken place. It just is. And so bad things happen and bad circumstances arise. And because you're the public official, you're going to be thrown in the middle of those, and you got to sort them out. And inevitably, some people are not going to forgive you for doing what you believe is the right thing, for doing what is the right thing. But on the flip side of that, politically, of course, you can lose office, right? But being unethical can be costly too. This really isn't a cost-benefit analysis. At the end of the day, it's not a cost-benefit analysis. Think of it this way. I made this comment a little earlier. Am I in trouble? Okay. I was check. Did I do something unethical? You did make a decision Raise your hand if you ran for public office because somebody blackmailed you to run. Yes, just has their hand go up, right? You know, I mean, okay, but you know, we can joke and laugh, but bottom line is, A, everyone in this room has a strong ego. If you didn't, you wouldn't have been comfortable saying, vote for me and not her, or him, or whatever, right? I mean, you're better than them, right? That's why. This isn't junior high school where you vote for your opponent, I hope. I hope. You know, if you put yourself on the ballot, it better be because you think you're the best person running. So, okay, you think you're the best person running. I hope you thought you're the best person running, right? Well, that works too. Well, then you were the best person. You're also the worst person, but we won't go there. But you chose this, and because you chose it, you need to take seriously the obligations you took on. You have an obligation to value some things that you don't have to value as a private citizen, and to consider some costs and consequences that as a private citizen you don't have to worry about. And several people have picked it up over the course of this conversation. Perception is not just about how people see you and whether or not they're going to vote for you next time. Perception is how they see the government under which they live. And not to raise too unpleasant a subject, but think about how you and I and our neighbors are thinking right now about the government in Washington that brought us to the brink of default. Republicans, Democrats, Congress, the White House, take them all and put them in a dump truck because they brought us to the brink of default. They shook the global economy. And I'm sorry, what the American public thinks about that is that most of them did it for political gain. What does that do to the country? What does that do to the ability of public leaders to step in front of an audience and say, there's going to be a cost to get us out of the problem we're in. We're all going to have to bear some sacrifice. Yeah, right, I believe you. I saw what you did. It's not just about us getting elected or not. It's about how the public sees the government that's responsible for, in an important way, their welfare. It's not just about us. That's part of the obligation you accepted by accepting public office. And with it, that higher degree of visibility. Mike made the comment that I may still be better known in Tampa. That's because I'm a political analyst now on a couple different local network affiliates, so I'm still on TV a lot. But when I was on council, we televised our show, our council meeting weekly on Thursday, more than once. I swear, people in Tampa knew my name and face better than they knew the congressman, any of our state reps or state senators, because they saw me on TV all the time. Because I can't keep my mouth shut, but, right? I mean, so we have this high visibility. We can't hide. Our decisions, good, bad, and indifferent, ethical and unethical, are going to be on the marquee for people to see. That's an asset. Your power. And power is neither a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just a thing. What you do with it determines whether it's good or bad. That's a power. People are paying attention to what you do. If you conduct yourself according to a very high standard, they're going to begin to believe that it is possible that the government is serving them. You fail to do that, or make them think you're failing to do that, and they're not going to believe. You took this on. It was your choice. So please, oops, sorry. There you go, that's what I want. Use the power you've been given. I'll just put that one other way, because I know some of us serving in municipal office aren't necessarily comfortable with the idea of being the powerful person in the community. We tend to box ourselves in by the charter. No. You're much more powerful than the charter says you are. When the councilman expresses an opinion, when the mayor speaks about something, a lot of people are paying attention. Use that power. And think about how you're using that power and the special obligations you've taken on to raise the bar, to be a model, so that people can see what it means to serve a community with honor and integrity, and they can believe it's possible. Because if we don't do that, we're not getting out of this mess. The public needs to be able to trust its leaders, and it's going to start with you. If it's going to happen, it's going to start with you. Thank you. We have 10 minutes before our session is over, so we can take questions or comments that people would like. Miriam?
If you can just let me for one moment, because I know some people are going to be leaving. There was a handout dealing with the PowerPoint presentation, and there was also a free copy of Dr. Payne's book. We have run out of those. However, at the back table, there is a sign-up sheet.
Sharon's holding it up.
Sharon's holding it up right now. If you put your information down, we will make sure that, number one, the PowerPoint presentation gets emailed to you, I think, or it's going to be on the website, but give us your information, and we will also make sure that you get a copy of Dr. Payne's book. The other thing, because trying to be ethical here, everyone out here got chocolate today, didn't you? If you came in, okay. Dr. Payne's favorite, as he said earlier, is dark chocolate. So to thank you for providing us an informative and thought-provoking presentation today, we want to thank you, and we want you to have this dark chocolate.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now I'm going, do we want to?
This, what I'll say is, I guess maybe the best thing to do, because I see people getting up to go to things, and that's cool. I know we've got a reception coming up in a little bit. We'll just let you go, and if you want to chat, come talk, okay? We'll talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here today. Enjoy your stay with us at the Florida League of Cities meeting.
You know what? I just realized, you remember Jones and Collar when you was in New York?
Yes.
And your other, she's out of political city. And you